Welcome back. Tonight's Reddit stories bring strange encounters and quiet chills, the kind that stay with you. Whether you're winding down, cooking, doing chores, or just passing the time, these tales make the perfect background companion. Settle in and let's begin. My 90-year-old grandfather told me something disturbing. "She's buried under that tree," my grandfather whispered, pointing out the window to the front lawn. Oh boy, I thought, here we go again. For 90 years old, Grandpa was physically capable. He could move, do basic chores, and eke out a decent existence. His primary weakness was his mind. "Who's buried there?" I asked, humoring his senility as I adjusted the angle on his lift chair. "The girl with white hair and green skin." Green skin? I wondered. "That's new." I fixed Grandpa's chair to the recline position and made my way to the kitchen. "I'm gonna make us some sandwiches." "All right, sweetie." I left him there in front of the TV. This weekend was my monthly visit. My siblings and I switched weekends to make sure Grandpa wasn't alone. The location was inconvenient because he lived in the ass crack of nowhere. It was a good 2 hours to the nearest town. If you needed something other than general store items, you'd be driving for a while. After I finished the sandwiches, I slid one on a plate and placed it in Grandpa's lap. "Thanks, honey," he said, and started chewing with yellow teeth. I sat down on the sofa, cracked open a murder mystery book. A golf tournament was playing on TV. I hated golf, but that was the only thing he liked, so I occasionally glanced out the window at the beautiful vista to keep myself from boredom. Grandpa's property was strange in that it was high up in the mountains, appropriate for farming, but his specific land hadn't been built for that. He lived in a mobile home just beneath a hill. There were trees decorating the terrain, but the only one on his quarter-acre lawn was a pine my father had brought up years ago as a sapling. It was well over 12 feet now. "She's buried there," he mumbled, devouring a slice of ham on bread. Why does he keep saying that? I focused my gaze on the tree and the lawn. What an odd thing to hallucinate. 2 hours later, I was interrupted by a call from my brother, Stu. "Hey, Grace," he said, his voice as cheerful as ever. "How's Gramps?" "Coping," I said. Grandpa had fallen asleep in his chair, a half-eaten sandwich in his lap. "He's resting after a light lunch." "Good, he needs that." I returned to the couch, saved the spot in my murder mystery. My eyes fell on the lonely pine outside. "Stu, can I ask you something?" "Sure, sis." "Has Grandpa mentioned anything about a green girl buried under a tree?" Stu fell silent. "Stu, give me a second." "You there?" "Yeah, just a minute." A heavy sigh. "When did he start mentioning it?" "This morning." "Don't let him talk about it." "Why not?" "Because he gets all worked up when Jess and I were there last month. We found him digging a hole under the tree at 2 in the morning. He thinks someone lives down there. He belongs in a care home." I turned towards Grandpa, noted his frail shoulders, the muscles that had carried bales of hay and iron tools for years. Now his body was fading. "Grace, I'm still here. Make sure he doesn't talk about it." It was 5:15 when I cleared the plates from the dining table. "Thanks for cooking, sweetheart." "Of course, Grandpa. Need help getting to bed?" "No," he sighed, seemingly deep in thought. He pushed himself out of his seat. Waddled down the hall. It took him so long to reach the other end of the trailer. "Grace," he stopped at this bedroom door. "Yes, you do believe me about the girl under the tree?" "Yes, Grandpa." "Good, if anything happens, stay by my side, I'll protect you." Huh. With that, Grandpa cracked open his bedroom door and slipped inside. F-whack, my eyes shot open. It was dark, maybe 1 in the morning. F-whack, a hard metallic noise thundered in my ears. What was that? F-whack, I stumbled out of bed, disoriented. Face aching with exhaustion, I ripped open the blinds. A man was swinging a tool at the foot of the pine tree. "Grandpa," I raced to his room. The bed was empty. F-whack, the metallic clangs grew louder. "What's happening?" I ran to the sofa, grabbed my phone, turned on the flashlight, and stumbled outside. The moon was barely up. Cold air bit my skin as I pulled my shirt close, covering my body. Just ahead, Grandpa was hunched at the 12-foot pine, swinging a pickaxe. I was so stunned to see him lifting the massive tool. "Grandpa, what are you?" "She's coming, Grace. I have to set her free. Grandpa, it's 3 in the morning. I have to get her out." I grabbed Grandpa's wrist, but he shoved me back. I landed on my posterior, my flashlight's beam illuminating his face, wide with terror. "Don't stop me, Grace. If I don't let her out, she'll take you too." Without another word, he slammed his tool into the earth. The next morning, Grandpa and I sat at the table chewing bacon and eggs. Neither of us had slept. Grandpa, he looked at me with weariness in his eyes. "What happened last night?" He let out a deep sigh, pulled out a worn shoebox from a cabinet. "See this?" He brought out a stack of black and white photos. "This is your grandmother, Belle, and me a few years after we were married. And here," he tapped the face of an adorable boy, "is your father." In the background of the picture, I noticed a young girl, maybe 4 years old, perched on a fence, watching everyone with a miserable gaze. "Who's that?" "The green girl. She's the one who's buried under that tree. She took your father and grandmother. Now she's coming for me. Why? Because she's death. Death, boom." The front door lurched with sudden impact. Grandpa and I swerved our gazes, deep in fear and concentration. "Didn't you think it was odd how Grandma died so young?" "And your father, boom. This girl lived in the woods. She was there for each family member who passed on. Boom. My uncle, Aunt. When I figured it out, I found her in the woods. Made sure she never came after us again. You killed a child. She's no child, Grace. She's evil. And she's coming for me." Boom. I ran to the couch, peered out the window to see a hunched figure wearing old pioneer clothes. They were bashing their fists against the door. "Someone's out there. It's all right, Grace. She only wants me." The slamming grew more intense. I retraced my steps to the table. "Why is she harassing our family?" "I don't know, Grace. But it's been like that ever since I was a boy. Whatever you do, don't make eye contact with her." Boom. The front door caved in under the pressure. I closed my eyes, then reopened them. A strange figure stood in the doorframe, about 4 feet tall, dressed in worn rags. Her skin was as green as a pine tree's leaves. Long white hair flowed down her back. "She's here." The green girl shuffled toward us across the carpet. I watched in suspense, so scared I could barely breathe. My eyes searched for a weapon and found a letter opener. I reached for it. "Stop, Grace. This has to happen." I gawked in horror as the green girl lurched up to Grandpa, let out a blood-chilling gasp. "Hee." The sound of her breath stung my ears. Grandpa commanded, "Only me? That's the deal." The green girl grabbed his face with bone-thin hands and held her mouth over his. A sickening sound of rushing wind accompanied her widening mouth. Grandpa gave a frightened gasp, then collapsed. "Grandpa." The green girl let out a sickening groan, limped back to the door. "Wait." The creature looked at me. "Why are you doing this?" The green girl pointed at the clock hanging above the dining table. Then pointed at herself, then me. For the next few seconds, I was too shocked to move. With a final groan, the green girl limped out the front door and was gone. "It's been 2 days. I called the sheriff. They investigated everything. I've been asked so many questions. My siblings think I'm crazy. Stu's the only one who believes me. Why? He says that one night, while he was at Grandpa's, he heard a woman speaking in one of the rooms. It reminded him of a soothing voice he had once heard as a young boy. A voice that told him the exact date he would die. And that date wasn't far off. Something ancient still lives in the most uninhabitable parts of America's deserts. The Chihuahuan Desert is as inhospitable as it is vast. I drove through my last small town an hour or two before and hadn't passed a car in 30 minutes. The only noises accompanying me on my journey was the hum of my vintage Cadillac I just picked up in San Antonio and the occasional squawk of a turkey vulture overhead. The radio was busted, not that I cared all that much. I preferred to be alone with my thoughts, especially when driving. The dust bites like a rattlesnake out here, and seeing it creep into the car's dark paint job almost brought a tear to my eye. I can remember that day clearly. The sun was high in a cloudless sky and beating down relentlessly on everything below it. Beads of sweat dripped like a busted faucet down my brow, forcing me to squint. The barely paved road was desolate, and by this point in the day, it felt like I hadn't seen another car in hours, or anything for that matter. Even the cacti had petered out. Either side of me lay a landscape of orange and beige, dotted with dying shrubs and otherworldly rock formations. Very little called the cracked soil home. Scorpions, snakes, and insects bordering on alien. Buzzards fed on the hardiest of mammals who tried to stick it out. Whether it was a rabbit, a wolf, or a human being, they'd all be reduced to a scattering of bleach-white bones. Still, this patch of land had a road running through it for a reason, which I was reminded of when I saw a gas station up ahead. It began as a pinprick on the horizon, enlarging as I drew nearer. There was a certain haze to the building, an illusion of the heat. I left a trail of dust in my wave as I pulled into the mirage. Parking by the pumps, which had a no gas sign hanging about them, I swung my car door open and let my boots hit the sand. The heat struck immediately. It was oppressive and blistering, but bearable if you'd been raised in it. I straightened my spine with a crack and looked around. The building looked derelict. The windows covered in faded advertisements were cracked and stained and set into crumbling masonry. From further up the road, I saw that a small home had been tacked on behind the gas station. Surrounding the structure was a collection of a dozen or so cars, rusted and ruined. Accompanying them was discarded furniture, anything from a rotting wooden closet to an old washing machine. The place was a dump, and the makeshift animal bone decor dangling from every overhang only made it more repulsive. Then again, it wasn't like I had a choice of where to stop off. I gritted my teeth, passed under the bison's skull above the entrance, and stepped inside. The counter was unmanned and the store was barren. I walked in and made my way between the shelves, each stacked with a handful of goods. A dozen cans of beans here, a few bottles of sauce there. An unplugged freezer was nestled in the far corner. It had an awful smell wafting from it. There was a rack to my right with a few unrecognizable brands of candy stocked on it. Looking closely, I realized the small black stains that covered the colorful packaging was in fact a colony of ants. I glanced down the aisle, taking it all in. My grandmother's pantry was more well-stocked than this place, and she's dead. "What can I do you for?" called a warm voice from behind me. I whirled around. There was a man standing behind the counter, his hands resting on the dusty wooden top. His skin was a sickly pale, punctuated by a deathly blue hue. He wore a yellowing vest, stained with oil and sweat. As I approached the store's dank checkout, I saw that he was wearing a tattered pair of jeans. He had a faded feed cap covering scraggly strands of gray hair. His face, like the rest of him, had been through the ringer. His eyes alternated between beady and bulging, his fat, hawkish nose was bent into the shape of a question mark, and he had fewer teeth than I could count on my fingers. He seemed to be proud of what blackened teeth he had left, though, as he grinned hideously. "I was wondering if you had a map I could take a look at," I said. "A map, huh? Sure," he replied. "What kind?" "State map, road map, just one of the local area, please," I asked. Suddenly he yelled, shocking me into taking a step back. "Plum, bring me the small map," shouted the man behind the counter. There was no response. For a second, we just looked at each other in silence. "The name's Hank, by the way," said the man as he wiped his nose on his wrist before holding out his hand to shake mine. I returned the gesture reluctantly and told him my name. Not my real one, of course, but it was the polite thing to do. It was followed with more silence as I awkwardly stood in front of him, trying to look anywhere but the growth under his eyelid. I felt a craving starting to build up in me and saw the rack of gum by the counter impressively. It was ant-free. I grabbed a packet of apple-flavored chewing gum and slid it across to Hank. "I'll take this too," I said. Hank nodded. "That'll be..." He paused for a long second before saying, as if it was a question, 5 cents. 5 cents? I parroted, surprised. Sorry, said Hank when he saw my reaction. I meant 45 cents. I took out a crumpled dollar bill and handed it to him. He took it from me and folded it into his antique register, then plucked out the right change which he deposited into my palm. As I put the gum in the back pocket of my levies, the old door to our left creaked open. A girl shyly walked in, who couldn't have been more than 9 or 10. She had a white dress on, the hem covered in mud and sand. Her skin was a perfect shade of white, and her hair wasn't far behind. She glanced at me with raw, pink eyes as she handed a map to Hank. "Thank you, Plum," he said, putting her shoulder. She turned and wandered back through the door. Hank unfurled the map, spreading it out in front of us. It was basic, showing a small section of highways and byways that cut through the surrounding desert. Hank's cruciform pendant dinked against the counter as he leaned, hunchback flared, over it. He poked a finger at me as he slumped forward. "Why are you heading by here anyhow?" he asked gruffly. "We don't get much folks a-coming through nowadays." "Business," I replied. When Hank realized that was all he was getting in the way of an answer, he relented and leaned back. I thanked him dryly and inspected the map closely. The first thing I noticed was a small red line drawn through one of the roads. In the far corner, a particularly desolate stretch of land was marked by a red pen scrawled in the shape of an X. I pressed my finger down on this spot of the map and looked at Hank. "What's that about?" I asked him in earnest. Suddenly and furiously, he pounded his meaty fist down on the counter, causing the various jars and knickknacks laying across it to shake. Spittle flew from the corner of his cracked lips as he spoke. "Don't you fucking think about it, you Yankee fuck," roared the inbred. I took a cautious step back. "Hey man, I was just asking," I yelled back. What followed was a quick and intense staring contest. Hank suddenly moved, as if he was about to come out from behind the counter. As soon as he did, I got out of there, kicking the decrepit front door open and almost off its rusted hinges. I trudged out, stirring up dust as I speed-walked back to my car. The little girl, Plum, was sitting on the ground across the gas pumps. An old umbrella was stabbed into the dirt in front of her, masking her in shade. She looked away from the dead rattlesnake she was playing with and watched me as I slammed the driver's side door shut. I pulled out as Hank walked hurriedly towards me. I began down the road and saw that he'd stopped in the middle of the tarmac behind me, a small cloud of sand swirling around him. "Careful, stranger," he screamed as I drove off. "It's egg-frying hot out there." I'm not fond of rural America. Sure, there's the occasional quaint mom and pop shop that offers a free slice of apple pie with every purchase, but they felt few and far between. It's a shame. I can remember thinking as I drove that my job often led me out to the boondocks. Not that the cities were much better, but they never claimed otherwise. I've never heard of someone being shocked by a bad encounter in a place like Spartanburg, but out here, a certain plastic kindness is expected. Rarely, from my personal experiences, is it ever found. I was going to the Red Xen area where anyone passing through is told expressly not to go felt perfect, and I had commit Hank's map to memory. Once I was far enough away from that gas station, and sure he wasn't following me in the old pickup I saw parked next to the building, I pulled up on the side of the road. I opened my glove compartment and took out my own folded road map of that state. I traced the marked roads, finding my location and working out my position in relation to Hank's small scope map. I found the spot, sans a few roads that I assumed were only known and used locally, and were just dirt tracks by any other name. Because of this, I reasoned they didn't make the cut for any official land survey. After some pondering and pen-chewing, I felt pretty certain that I'd located the supposed forbidden area and marked it in myself. I put the map down on the passenger seat and started to drive. Over the next few hours, I passed 2 cars. Both times, I held my breath as they went by, waiting for them to stop and for Hank's entire extended and heavily armed family to pile out. That didn't happen, obviously, and I was left alive long enough to enjoy the wonderful scenery. The further I went, the more the full, desolate landscape became populated with strange and awesome rock formations. They stood at odd angles, like the furniture arrangement of some biblical giant. Some sprawled like massive petrified fungi. Others stood slender and small near the roadside, tricking my tired mind into imagining a desperate hitchhiker. As the sun dipped below the orange horizon and a deep purple overtook the sky, these stationary travelers became more frequent. Some were geological features, others were cacti, but a few I could have sworn were neither. Without GPS or really any road signs to work off, my journey consisted mostly of guesswork. Still, I was relatively certain I was in the right spot as I veered off the barely paved road and into the desert, praying to God to protect my bumper. My headlights pervasively revealed my surroundings as I drove further, crushing small shrubs beneath my wheels. Finally, I decided I was secluded enough. I braked, parking my car next to a small clearing of earth with little vegetation. I let the car run, lighting up the area. I swung the door open and stood up for the first time in hours. My back cracked in places I never imagined could as I stretched. After limbering, I opened the back door and leaned in. Retrieving the shovel laid out under the seat, slammed the door shut again and walked to the back of the car. I popped the trunk and grimaced. The body had started to smell. It was to be expected, I can remember thinking, since it had hit 100 degrees F on the journey out here. With that in mind, I was surprised that she hadn't been baked in that small metal compartment. The body was a woman in her 40s, I reckoned, with dyed blonde hair and a poor dress sense. I wasn't sure why she was killed or why they needed her to disappear so fast, but then again, I never was. Not that it mattered. I grabbed her, making sure to lift with my legs as I heaved the encumbering weight from its resting place. I set it down in the dust with a puff of my chest and got to digging her grave. I'd been blessed with a patch of land free of hard-packed caliche. Instead, it was mostly loose topsoil and sand. This wasn't without an extra magnitude of difficulty, though. The cold night winds of the desert blew less into the slowly deepening hole. On top of this, loose sediment collapsed inwards every few minutes. The whole ordeal felt like taking a step forward and two back. Gradually, the hole began to widen. Soon, it was almost 3 feet deep. I thanked God for not placing a layer of volcanic rock right beneath where I stood during his creation of the earth. Once it was at an acceptable depth, I set the shovel down and began to drag the corpse toward it. It was cold, and stupidly I hadn't brought a jacket with me. Doing so felt needless considering the midday weather. Shivering, I dumped the body unceremoniously in the small pit. Still in the fetal position, I started to cover it up with the dry dirt piled around the opening. Eventually, there was no evidence of her existence other than a small bump in the ground. Satisfied, I threw my trusty shovel in the trunk, not wanting to get soil all over the leather seats. I closed and locked it and walked around to the front of the car. I took a packet of cigarettes and a lighter from the glove compartment and lit one up. I started to amble around the car as I smoked. It really was a lovely part of the country. The moon was high in the sky now, and the rock formations were left as nothing but a silhouette, all depth and color lost. While visually the beauty had been dampened, I could clearly hear the vibrance of my surroundings. Coyotes howling, owls shrieking, and masses of insects buzzing singularly. All of this was tied together by the dull moan of the wind, swirling up clouds of fine shale around me as I walked. I met it with my own clouds of tobacco smoke, but it was no contest. Getting lost in the strange elegance of the southwestern United States was as easy as getting lost there, physically. I suddenly became conscious of my absent-minded wandering. I dropped my cigarette and killed it under my boot heel. The car was about 30 yards away, easily visible thanks to the blinding headlamps. As I started to walk towards it, a sudden stillness grasped the area. Listening out, I could hear, well, nothing, apart from the low hum of the engine. Frowning, I kept making my way towards the car. I reached the driver's side door, yanked it open, and collapsed inside with a sigh. I pinched the bridge of my nose. The beginnings of a migraine were starting to take hold. I exhaled again as I started to drive, the uneven ground making for a bumpy ride. I hadn't even reached the road when I saw it. Looking in my wing mirror, I saw someone standing over the grave. The figure was a featureless silhouette, made visible by the moonlight. I stopped the car and got out, squinting to see it better. Was it a mirage? A trick of the dim light? I could make out a head and arms hanging just apart from the torso. I was sure it was right where I had buried the body. I took a flashlight from the glove compartment, flicked the beam on high, and began to make my way toward the figure. Bright light wasn't kind to the foliage, which appeared as sickly green-gray weeds. I brushed past them as the figure came more in view. I strained my eyes to glean more detail until, suddenly, it disappeared. Like a tower being demolished, its humanoid form pancaked downwards and became the night. "Hey, hey," I shouted, unnerved. I picked up my pace until I was at the spot. I threw the light around me, but saw nothing other than the small patch of upheaved earth. Once I was sure no desert-dwelling hick had stumbled onto the burial site, I turned, constantly glancing over my shoulder, and walked back to the car. At this point, it was freezing. I could see my breath swirl in the air around me. The difference in temperature between midday and midnight was astounding. I started to wonder if it was a punishment, the fact that my boss gave me a car with busted air conditioning for this job. I chuckled to myself, sending another cloud of freezing vapor out around me. My flashlight's beam finally cast itself over the Cadillac. There was someone sitting in the back seat. I froze, this time from fear rather than the harsh weather. I stood still, just a few feet away from the back of the trunk. The back of the person's head looked bleached and wrinkled. I realized the red band of fabric around it was a hat. Suddenly, the thought that it was Hank struck me. Fear mixed with anger, and I clutched the flashlight like a dagger, ready to use it as a weapon. I charged and swung open the back door. The inside was empty. I cursed and threw my light down onto the padded seats. I slammed the door shut and walked around the side, taking my place behind the wheel. I hit the gas and started barreling through the landscape, the car's suspension not easing the brutal terrain. I started to climb the small incline that led to the road. Finally, I swerved onto the paved path. Abruptly, the car stalled. Conked out, it moved slowly like a lame deer down the road. Suddenly, as I was trying to get the damn thing going again, a figure appeared in the glow of my headlights. My car came to a final halt within the figure's touching distance. This time, I could clearly make him out. He was a man, tall and emaciated. His skin had been leathered by the harsh sun, and his hair was a tangled rope-like mess. The face of a coyote, skinned from the skull of the creature, dangled between the man's legs, acting as a loincloth. Other than that, and the crown of dried desert flowers across his brow, he was naked. A red dye had been applied to the upper part of his face, seeping from his hairline to down below his dark eyes, where only total blackness occupied. With an animalistic clamber, the man leapt from the asphalt and onto the hood. The car's engine gasped to life as the man positioned himself on the roof, taking a slender flint dagger from his loin strap and stabbing it into the windscreen. Eye cracks spread like scary fingers reaching, and I knew a second attack would cave it in. I hit the gas for a second time, and my car began to surge down the road. There was a dull thud, and I saw in my wing mirror that the man had rolled off. I sighed, and vowing to never enter this state again, I drove off. If I had to guess, I'd say around 5 minutes passed, and I was doing 60 or so. That's when I heard it, a low pattering noise, almost drowned by the sound of the engine. It grew louder, and before I glanced in the mirror to confirm my position, I saw him. He was keeping pace with the car, running up to the driver's side window. I screamed and swerved the car, trying to knock him down. He simply dropped back a few yards before catching up again. It was an unnatural sprinting that put any athlete to shame, mixed with a predator's dash every time he dropped to all fours. Whenever I would hazard a glance back, he seemed to be in another stage of monstrous transmutation. His skin shifted and moved like a disturbed wasp nest was trapped beneath it. As his bones cracked and reformed, he began to lag behind. By the time it began to howl and scream with a dozen voices, of man and beast, it was lost in the darkness behind me. I gripped the wheel like it was the only thing keeping me alive and kept driving. I had stopped looking behind me at this point, my vision locked onto the road in front of me. My panic started to ease off after a while of not hearing or seeing the thing. I realized how fast I was going and slowed down. A body rolled towards me. I slammed the brakes, but not before going over it with a crunch. I let out a strained gasp of defeat. Nursing my neck from the whiplash of the sudden halt, I put the car in reverse. Going over the body a second time, I moved back until it was laid bare in the light of the headlamp's beams. My suspicion was coldly confirmed. It was the body I had buried an hour before. I put my head in my hands, wondering if I'd taken a wrong turn and ended up in hell. It sure had the landscape to match. I looked up and saw that the body was still there. It was definitely the same person. Although she now had an extra gloss of blood covering her, I could make out the mom jeans and luminous pink top. I sat still, gripping the wheel for some time, paralyzed by both fear and choice. I knew if I left her there, she'd be found by the next passersby. I couldn't bear thinking about what my boss would do to me if that body's face was suddenly on every news broadcast across the state, even though I hadn't seen that thing that'd been tailing me in almost an hour. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me from the darkness. All of my dread mixed together in my mind, clouding it and stopping me from thinking of the real question: where did the body come from? I made my decision. If this was some sort of trap, I'd make sure I could easily get back to the car. I took a deep breath and reached for the door handle. Leaving the car running, I opened it and brought a foot down on the blacktop. Nothing. I climbed out of the car, leaving the door wide open. I stood up and looked around me. Nothing. I opened the back door, leaned in and grabbed my flashlight. I flicked it on and closed the door behind me. I turned and made my way towards the body. Nothing. I reached it. It had been damaged by the car, sure, but was still practically in one piece. I took my shirt off, my heart pounding for the split second it covered my eyes. The cold air bit my skin, but I fought through it. I used my worn short as a winch of sorts, wrapping it in a knot around the body's two arms. I grabbed the other end and started to drag her back around my car. Nothing. I heaved the body into the trunk, slamming it shut behind it. With my left hand shaking uncontrollably, I got back in the driver's seat, put my jacket on and began to move the car off the road and into the desert. I descended onto the rough soil with a thud and slowly meandered further out until the road disappeared behind me. Once I reached an area that I hoped no one would find, I cautiously got out again. The dust beneath my boots shifted as I walked. I took the shovel from the back seat and balanced it over my shoulder. Standing in front of the trunk, I set the shovel down and balanced my flashlight in my mouth. I reached down with both hands and heaved it up. The thing from earlier leapt out. At first, my brain didn't register what had happened. It wasn't until it had me on my back with its hands clutching my throat did I realize. The flashlight was still in my mouth, shining brightly into its painted face. Its eyes were pure white and murderous. The jaw was torn down further than human anatomy allows, and its skin looked like dried leaves, barely connected to the flesh. Black spots appeared in my vision as the monster tried to tear my life away. Just before I passed out, my hand found a large, jagged rock. I swung my arm in an arc, bringing the rock down on the base of the thing's skull. It relinquished its grip, falling back long enough for me to get to my feet. I grabbed the shovel and brought it crashing down on the thing's head, buckling its neck. I lifted it again, primed for a second swing, when suddenly the thing flailed its right arm wildly in the air. As it did, the wooden handle of my shovel erupted into flame. Hands sizzling, I dropped the tool and bolted towards my car. The witch, or whatever was trying to kill me, descended to all fours. As I slammed the door shut, it reared up, head-butting the window. A large crack appeared as my car began to move, the uneven terrain brutalizing the suspension. The grotesque witch clung to the frame as I swerved violently. Its skull began to shift under the skin. Before it could transform, I drove into the one structure in the area, a lone standing rock. I turned just before a head-on collision became inescapable. The rock scraped against the side of the car, like an iceberg against the hull of a great ship. The witch was pummeled against it as well, and went flying off into the darkness. Eventually, the light from my headlamps illuminated the road, and I was once again driving on open highway. Not even for a second did I think I was safe, and my paranoia became wholly justified when I heard the now familiar pounding against the asphalt. A glance in my mirror confirmed that the wish was once again gaining on me. Its legs were bent like a jackal's, or rather the bones were, with the flesh begrudgingly following the new form of their frame. The rest of its body remained humanoid, for now. I accelerated to several times above the speed limit. As the witch began to fade back into the darkness as I outpaced it, I heard a low hissing. Suddenly, the hatch to my glove compartment fell open. Dozens of writhing rattlesnakes poured out like liquid, filling the car's floor and darting between the pedals. More and more slithered from every opening in the now ruined Cadillac, surrounding me. I started to, unwisely, beat my head against the stirring wheel and scream. When I jerked back and looked around, the car was free of snakes once again. I realized that I hadn't been bitten, and that my hands passed through the reptiles like vapor. I felt the cold hand of the witch clawing at my brain from within, attempting to induce whatever nightmare hallucination it so chooses. I shook my head violently, trying to free myself from it. When I opened my eyes, the warlock's face was pressed against the passenger side window. I accelerated again, leaving it trying to catch up behind me. As I drove, the retro radio built into the wood-veneered dash crackled and popped. From the static, a voice appeared. Deep and chanting, it soon became audible over the engine's roar. It screamed out in a language I couldn't begin to fathom. The anti-melody continued, and as it did, my eyes began to water. Soon, it felt like hornets were stinging them, tiny needles pricking in and out a dozen times a second. The pain was unbearable, and the half-shattered mirror confirmed that I was now crying blood. I swerved erratically from lane to lane, even mounting the desert sporadically. My hand found the radio and I punched it, and kept pounding until my hand disappeared into the mess of wires. I withdrew my now bloodied, broken hand from the ruined stereo, and it went back to clutching the wheel, as best it could. A giant, gangrenous coyote was now running by my car. As my vision returned and the pain, at least the pain in my eyes, subsided, I tried to make the beast out. I couldn't tell if it was another hallucination or the witch transformed. Either way, I knew I couldn't keep going forever. The Cadillac, which was physically near destruction, was also now running on fumes. I knew I couldn't keep going for long, and the merciful part of my brain prevented me from thinking of what would happen when I stopped. And that's when it happened. I almost didn't notice it, and when it registered, I didn't think it of any importance. There was a line running through the road, where one era of paving began and another ended. I passed it with ease, but the beast, on the other hand, came to an abrupt halt like a car slamming into a brick wall. I left it in a cloud of dust, its howling coated with a distinctly human frustration. I drove in silence for a few minutes. Silence was welcomed with open arms. I had practically sunken into my leather seats and was driving on complete autopilot. My brain played a reel of memories from the past few hours as it tried to tackle this incomprehensible scenario. It had no luck in doing so and eventually gave up. I started to slowly calm until a voice piped up behind me. "I warned you," said Hank. I looked into the mirror and saw him sitting in the seat directly behind mine. I paused for a while before answering. "Are you real?" I said in a broken voice, terrified the witch might still be chained to my mind. "I used to be," he replied somberly. He sighed and took his hat from his head, clutching it to his chest. I now saw what it was hiding. His scalp had been cut away, exposing the dome of his skull. A ring of scabbing tissue circled his head like a crown of thorns, a remnant from his trauma. "What are you?" I asked. "Trapped," he replied singularly. I looked back at the road ahead. A little stream was starting to rise from beneath the battered hood, but I decided to ignore it for now. "What was that thing?" I said, knowing he'd understand the question. "He's been out here as long as I have," said Hank, glancing out the window. I waited for more of an answer, but none came. A dull glow appeared on the horizon, which grew in intensity as we neared. Soon, it took the form of the gas station. "Drop me off here," Hank asked, breaking a pattern of silence. I did as I was told, bringing the car to a stop just outside the pull-in. Hank opened the door and got out without thanking me. He walked around to where a young girl, Plum, was waiting for him. I noticed 2 arrows were now protruding from her abdomen. He took her hand, and I watched as they both walked inside. By the grace of God, my car started moving again, and I was away. It did, however, die shortly after the sun rose. I left the now burning hunk of metal in a ditch and walked a mile or so until a haulage truck passed. It stopped for me, and I rode with him to El Paso. He was old, in his late 60s if I had to guess, and had a scruffy beard like an unwashed dog. I could see in his eyes that he did not know what lies beyond the veil. I have been on the run since that day, mainly from my employers. The body was disposed of safely, sure, but I never met with my handler and certain questions were raised after they found what was left of the car they had supplied. When I say on the run, I mean I've been living a quiet life in a small town in rural Oregon. I'm a permanent resident and handyman at the B&B of a sweet old lady who reminded me of the woman who raised me. For me, it really is a quiet life, as since that night, I haven't been able to speak. I often stand in front of the mirror and try to talk to myself, but the words are lost at sea and never quite make it out from my mouth. Naturally, I've taken to writing, and think it's finally time you all know my story. That's all for tonight's stories. If you enjoyed them, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you don't miss the next one. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you soon.